Hello, my name is Suzanne Puckett, and I am one of the jurors for this case. While listening to both the plaintiff and the defendant, I could not see a way to make a clear choice. A guilty, not guilty choice is not going to be easy. The plaintiff has a great case. She insists that her confidentiality was broken and her rights were violated. The patient claims that she was not made aware that there was a request for her personal medical information, or her PHI, nor was she given the proper amount of time to appeal the request for that information. The plaintiff also states that the defendant fails to show that proper documentation was given to request the plaintiff's personal medical information. The defendant's argument seems to be that de-identification was used to remove all identifiers of the patient so that the file was not identifiable to the patient. Defendant states that they were no longer liable because the identifiers were removed. Now, Professor Schnapp brings up a good point when she questioned how the plaintiff was identified if identifiers were removed when clearly the subpoena was for her records. This points back to the question, is a subpoena a strong enough court document to release patient records? While the hospital was presented with a subpoena, they did not inform the patient of the request, allowing her time to appeal the subpoena. The hospital violated the plaintiff's rights to privacy and consent by not providing her with notice of the request for release of her medical records to allow her adequate time to appeal the request. Per the report, guidance from CDC and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on the cdc.gov website, the patient must receive adequate notice of the use and disclosures the covered entity will make of their PHI. The notice must be in plain language and in plain sight for the patient to understand. Covered entities are also required to provide individuals with an accounting of their PHI disclosure that includes the name of the person or entity who received the information, the date of that disclosure, a description of the information disclosed, and a brief explanation of the reasons for disclosure or a copy of that request. The CDC continues to show that covered entities may disclose PHI to law enforcement officers pursuant to a court order, a subpoena, or other legal order. So this shows that the subpoena was an appropriate document for that request. Now, as we look at the two issues, one being the hospital failed to determine that reasonable efforts had been made to ensure that the individual whose PHI was sought received notice of the request, and the hospital failed to receive satisfactory assurance that the party seeking the information made reasonable efforts to secure a qualified protective order. I find that the hospital had a clear reason to release the information with the presentation of a court document, the subpoena. However, the hospital did not provide a report to the plaintiff that a request for her PHI was received. The hospital clearly violated the patient's right to privacy by refusing her the knowledge of the release, dismissing her right to appeal that release. So if I have to choose a guilty or not guilty verdict in regards to the patient's privacy being violated, I choose guilty, but only with the condition that the hospital not be liable for the release of the PHI because they did so with the proper legal document that was submitted to them. Like I said, this case is not a clear-cut case, and I believe it's hard to choose a yes or no answer because, yes, one issue is showing that the hospital was at fault because they did not provide the patient with the information of the release request. However, they were presented with a subpoena, a legal document for the release of that record. Thank you.